Greetings all, F-Man here. Welcome back to Assetto Corsa, welcome to Imola, welcome to Racing Studios' still resplendent Formula RSS 1990 V12. Probably my co-favorite in sim racing alongside Racing Studios' Formula 2000 V10. However, I'm not here to talk about sim racing. I'm not here to talk about the car or the track. We're at Imola, of course, because this is effectively my place, or our place, as it were, because I've got 7 billion episodes of Hot Laps at Imola. That's a meme, but yes. I guess I would just like to explain to you what I've been doing, where I've been, why the channel has kind of changed a little bit in terms of the sort of posting that I've been doing, why it's been erratic, why it's been inconsistent, why I've put out some different sorts of content from time to time in the last few months. And I just want to explain to you where I am physically, mentally, and maybe what you can expect in the future. And I guess also kind of just reaching out to my audience in general in terms of wanting to interact with you, wanting to hear from you, wanting to hear about what you think of what I've done in the past, what I continue to do, and maybe some things you'd like to see in the future. But the long and short of this, as we go back into the pit lane here, or the setup screen, to put some fuel in this car, and we'll talk as we drive here. Not intending on being especially fast, but we'll talk as we drive. We'll put the medium compound tires on. We'll put 76 liters of fuel on board for no apparent reason, but we'll do it. I love this car. So we'll drive it, we'll be gentle with it, especially the medium tires, we'll get it up to temperature and all that stuff. However, to explain to you where I've been and what I've been doing, I made a community post back in January, I think it was like the 24th or 25th of January this year, explaining to all of you that my grandmother was dying, and she ended up dying on the 26th of January this year. And for a lot of people who I know, a lot of people I've talked to, grandparents are these people who maybe you met a couple of times as a child, usually in the single digits era of your age bracket. You met them maybe once or twice, and then you ended up at their funeral and you didn't quite understand who they were, what was going on, or why you had to be in this church or wherever you were for their funeral. Well, for me it was quite different. For me, my grandparents effectively raised me. I practically lived with them. To her credit, although this was incredibly difficult for her, particularly when I was younger, my mother kept a roof over our heads. She was a single mom, not by choice, not by any poor decisions on her part. In fact, she made really great decisions in total objectivity. But my mom ended up being a single mom when I was very young. And thankfully, she was very well educated. She had a respectable job as a teacher at the time. She continues to work in the public school system today. She was able to support us, but she needed help with the intangibles. She couldn't be around all the time. She didn't really have all the tools necessary to teach this little human that she was entrusted with all the things that he ought to know in order to interface with the world. So she was lucky enough to have her parents very close by, and they were still in their 40s at the time that this little baby was born. So my memories of my grandparents start when they were in their 40s. My grandmother was 42, which would have made my grandfather 43 when I was born. So I remember effectively having these two relatively young, still very vibrant and active people who effectively became co-parents to me from birth. So some of my earliest memories are interacting with them, going places with them, just doing things with them. but not in the sense of, oh, well, they're old, so they can't do much, or, oh, I have to be careful with them because, they might get sick because I have a cold or something. No. These people were vibrant, active, totally independent individuals in their own right. And I grew up with that. I had my mom, and then I had them. So I had my grandmother, who was kind of like my mom in a lot of ways, but as grandparents tend to be, a little bit more permissive, a little bit more mischievous, allowing you to get up to things that perhaps you couldn't do with your parents, that sort of thing. And of course, they always try to spoil you. And that was very much my experience as well, particularly with my grandmother. My grandfather, on the other hand, he was still very much working full-time at the time I was born. Eventually he would retire when he turned about 54, 55. He worked in telecom. He became a finance guy, an administrator at AT&T, later Lucent Technologies. That's not good. Tire's still a little bit cold here. But he became a finance guy. He ended his career with Lucent Technologies in about 2002, I would say. 9/11 was really bad for his retirement, but whatever. He was really smart. And because he worked in finance, he also had half a foot in the door of basically every other department in the company, so he was very much like me in the sense that he was very mechanically curious. He loved to tinker with things. He loved to learn about how things worked. So he would spend time in the engineering department figuring out, oh yeah, you guys are building a communications satellite that's going to be launched next year. How does this thing work? What's the bandwidth on this? How many calls can this satellite hold at the same time? How is it going to relay all of these things? I mean, he was into this stuff. And if I had a nickel for every piece of sensitive electronics that I ever personally encountered with serial numbers mysteriously ground off of them, I'd be a rich man. So, yes, I got an education in more ways than one, politically as well as practically, from my grandparents, particularly my grandfather. Because not only was he a tinkerer, but he was also a gearhead. And he was excessively cheap. Not in a bad way. If anybody in the family ever needed something, he was there to help immediately. And money was no object. He did very well for himself. He wasn't rich, but let's say that when my grandmother died, we ended up inheriting well more than enough to be okay. And that was entirely down to what my grandfather had done during his career. So we're still benefiting from the decisions that he made 50, 60 years ago. However, he was a gearhead. And he was cheap. He was a do-it-yourselfer. So what that meant was, on the weekends, and because I happened to be at their house pretty much every weekend, and sometimes during the week as well, we got up to stuff. Most of the time, that included things either in the house, making repairs in the house to plumbing, electrical, air handling, things like that, or, more frequently, we would be working on somebody's car. There was a time when I was very young where he personally owned 6 or 7 cars because he had a car for himself, he had a car for my grandmother, he had a car for my mom, he had a car for my uncle, who is 3 years younger than my mom, and he had a couple other cars that were also his for his personal use, either a truck. Usually he had a truck or some other sort of utility vehicle that either lived in the driveway or sometimes on the side of the house, much to my grandmother's displeasure, or he was lending a car out to somebody else. Either way, he had a lot of cars in his personal possession, which meant that there was always work to be done on these cars. One of my earliest cogent adult-type memories is working on his 1997 Toyota Camry. It was this maroon Camry, 4-door. Go look it up. You'll find a picture of this car someplace on the internet. It was maroon. I remember it had a pinstripe that he probably applied himself down both sides, about the level of the door glass. And it needed its front brakes done. disc brakes, single piston calipers on a car. You know, it's a road car, it's an economy car for the most part, so nothing too special. But it was the first time that I had ever done brakes on a car. And I remember doing this job with him. And I remember taking the wheel off. He had, it was actually an electric impact gun at the time. We later on used pneumatic tools and whatnot, but he used this absolutely ancient, even at that time, electric impact gun. And I remember picking this thing up in my 5-year-old hands and thinking, this is so heavy. And when I hit the trigger, it like flips my my arms around. Speaking of flipping your arms around, yeah. And I just remember thinking, how do people work with these things? Because they're so heavy and they're so violent when you use them, not realizing that, well, I'm 5 years old and I weigh about 40 pounds. And this thing is putting out about 100 pounds of torque, so yes, of course it's going to move me around when I hit the trigger. But whatever. But I remember doing this job with him, looking at all of these things behind the wheel. When you take the wheel off of a car, obviously you see the brake assembly, you see parts of the suspension, you see the brake lines, you see other things, particularly on the front end. There's usually a lot going on. You've got the control arms for the steering, you've got your A-arms for the suspension, upper and lower usually, you've got shocks or struts, whatever your setup is, and then you can usually see at least part of the steering rack. So I'm looking at all of this, and then my attention is brought to the brake caliper, which he's loosened the upper retaining bolt on, so it swings open on the lower bolt. And then he pops the pads out with his fingers. And along with the pads came these 2 wire clips, probably something unique to this particular model of Camry because I've never seen them on another car, and I've worked on a lot of cars myself since. So he gives me these 2 bits of twisted wire, these retainer clips that hold the pads in place from the lower side of the caliper once the pads are installed, and he tells me, do not lose these because the car won't stop without them. So I hold on to these 2 little retaining clips. There were 2 of them, one on the inboard, one on the outboard pad, and obviously duplicated on the other side. But I hold on to these clips white-knuckled for the entire time that I watch him complete this job. So obviously the pads come off, he compresses the caliper piston, new pads go on, and once the new pads go on, he turns to me and says, you have those clips? I say yes. I hand him the clips and they pop on. I may or may not have installed them myself, he might have let me do that. But whatever, the clips went back on, the caliper goes on over the new rotor. We changed the rotors too. Caliper bolts up, wheel goes back on. I don't think we bled the brakes, but wheel goes back on, car goes on the ground, and then he must have gone in and pumped the brakes up, make sure we had pressure, and then of course everything's done. We did it on both sides quite obviously. But that was one of the first memories that I had of touching a complicated object in a constructive, deliberate way with the object of repairing it or improving it in some way. And that was more or less a microcosm of what it was like to be with my grandparents. My grandmother, she was a homemaker for the majority of her life, but that didn't mean that she wasn't working. She worked under the table for decades. She was a hairdresser by trade. She was licensed and all that stuff. But once she married my grandfather and she had my mother within their first year of marriage, my uncle a couple of years later. So she was lucky enough. My grandfather was employed consistently enough to where she could be a stay-at-home mom to both of her kids, my mother and my uncle. But she kept working under the table. She was a hairdresser. When I was born, she was still working from time to time, per diem, totally independently, of course. Basically, as a freelancer, she cut hair for people who lived in, I guess it would be a project-based housing block, high-rise housing block, about 2 miles from where I live right now, consequently about a mile away from where she lived. It was for senior citizens, so she would cut their hair, do whatever they needed cosmetically. So she made a lot of friends that way. She made decent money that way, of course, all cash. So she was resourceful in her own ways, too. But of course, because she's got that motherly instinct, the feminine instinct, it was a different way of interacting with her, and she taught me different things. She taught me a lot of things about taking care of a household. How do you balance a checkbook? How do you write a check? How do you clean? How do you cook? Things like that. She wasn't particularly good at cooking, but, you know, she was better than I was. So it was very valuable, especially as a young kid, to learn about things like that. And then, of course, because she was by far the more permissive one, she was the one who I could give the business, as I used to say. So whenever I would spend the night at their house, she was the one who I would bother to give me things, to make me things. If I wanted food, she was the one to ask. So, yes, you could imagine. And it was all in good fun. But as I got older, as I started to have more of a context in terms of how people actually live their lives, the sorts of things that people interface with as they're growing up, I started to understand how unique it was not only to have two living grandparents within a mile of home, but I also understood how unique it was to have two living grandparents at all, because a lot of my peers, a lot of my classmates, they would tell me that their parents were in their 50s or 60s. And I went home and I looked at my mom, who was still in her 20s. And then I went to my grandparents and looked at my grandparents, who at the time were still in their 50s. So, like, it was really unique. And by the time that my last grandparent, my grandmother, died, I was 32, 3 months away from my 33rd birthday. So now, being 33, and understanding that I had a living grandparent until I was in my 30s, it's actually something pretty unique. It's not something that too many people get. And I suppose the perspective of that is something that you don't quite understand until it's gone, but I feel like I understand that now. And what that's done for me mentally, it's been interesting. It's been really interesting. My grandfather, he died in 2016. I've talked about him in the past on the channel. I remember I made one video many, many years ago where I read you the obituary that I wrote for him. And his death was entirely by shock. There was no warning. We didn't suspect a thing. He was vibrant. He was healthy all the way up to the end. Massive heart attack got him. Mercifully, he died more or less instantly. Actually, I remember rushing off to the hospital after I had heard that he was in the hospital. And when I got there, the floor physician in the ER just immediately took us into a room and said, look, this is his situation. His brain has been without oxygen for like 25, 30 minutes. We can keep him on life support, but we have no way of knowing how much damage has been done to his brain, but we can reasonably suspect that it's substantial, and that if he does make any kind of recovery, he is not going to be the person that he was. And it was so unique and so serendipitous in that moment that myself, my mother, and my grandmother, who were all there, we all said in unison, stop. We didn't talk about it. We didn't even exchange glances with each other. We all just instinctively said exactly the same thing. Stop. Take him off life support. Let him go. And they did that, and they pronounced him dead a couple of minutes later. It was that quick. It was that decisive. No drama. And it was exactly the way that he would have wanted it, too, because he hated being the center of attention. So in that moment where his life hung in the balance, where we were being entrusted to make that life or death decision, although effectively the decision had already been made by happenstance, there was no discussion. So I found that to be really, really interesting. My grandmother, though, it was very different. My grandmother, she had started to decline years ago, particularly after my grandfather died and she became a widow, and she then started living alone in the same house doing the same things, but now entirely by herself. It was quite different. I can't imagine what it's like to lose a spouse, somebody with whom you've been since you're a child. They literally were elementary school sweethearts. They met each other when they were like 8 or 9 years old. Eventually, they were married when my grandmother was 19, my grandfather was 20, and then they were parents by the time they were both 21. So think about that. So somebody with whom you have not only lived the vast majority of your life, but you grew up with this person. This person and their interaction, their perspectives have shaped you and your perspective. So imagine losing that suddenly. And again, it was quite sudden, without warning. It obviously did not leave my grandmother in a great condition. And she started to decline. She had, unfortunately, a really pervasive addiction to tobacco. She had her first cigarette when she was 13 years old, so that would have put it in like 1968, 1969 or so. She was born in 1948. And in later years, she also picked up a bit of an alcohol addiction. So once my grandfather died, all bets were off on that. She smoked at least 3 packs a day. She probably drank an entire gallon of wine per night. So mentally, she was never in really great straits. But when she was sober, she still had a lot to offer. And particularly in my earlier childhood, that's what I remember for the most. But in her later years, that started to catch up to her, and physically she started to have all sorts of setbacks. She never saw doctors. She hated doctors. She hated the idea of being told what to do, particularly being told what to do with her own body. But eventually, she must have felt so bad that she said, well, I guess I should see a doctor. So she did. She saw a cardiologist who said, look, you've got so much damage that you can effectively do whatever you want. There's no difference at this point. The damage is done, and whatever's going to happen is going to happen. So she took that as permission to keep doing what she was doing. So she kept doing that. And I would say in her last 3 to 5 years, the person that I had known as a child was no longer with us. She was still there physically, but at times it was almost like dealing with somebody who was very juvenile in their perspectives. Very naive. Disturbingly so, when you remember that you were talking to somebody in their 70s. So when she eventually had her final decline, it was not surprising. It was surprising in the sense of it was happening when it did, but it wasn't surprising in the sense of what was happening was transpiring. We expected more or less that it would be like this. She had gone into the hospital in earlier January of this year after she had fallen. When we asked her what happened, she said that she really couldn't remember. She just felt faint, fell over, and then woke up on the floor. She went to the hospital once for that. They sent her back home. Then it happened again, and then that was the hospitalization that she never returned from. I went to the house the night it happened. I found all the blood on the floor. Found the blood in the bathroom where she had actually fallen over. I saw the damage on her car where she had evidently run it into a concrete retaining wall someplace earlier in the day. So she clearly was not doing well even earlier. So we knew that it was time. Again, we were hopeful that it wouldn't be, but ultimately it was. The two memories that I'll retain for the rest of my life regarding the loss of my grandmother are 2 episodes at the hospital. The first time I visited her, I think it was 1 or 2 days after she had been transferred from our local hospital up to one further north, which had a little bit more of a sophisticated cardiac unit, where they were hoping to be able to do something for her. I saw her in the early afternoon, and I happened to be there while she had a stroke. I was in the room, and we had gone up there and we were interacting with her, and she was more or less coherent. She was cogent. She recognized me. She recognized my mother. She didn't quite understand where she was, but that was almost excusable because, well, she had been taken a good 45 minutes north to an area that she was not at all familiar with. So we could understand that. But she recognized us. She knew who she was. She even told us that she had meat in her refrigerator that was going to go bad, so we needed to do something about that. So she was lucid and cogent. And then she started to have a stroke right in front of us. So I watched in real time as she went from being lucid, coherent, and cogent to being entirely unintelligible in her speech, to have these completely gross and exaggerated physical movements that were probably not within her control. And she took on the disposition very rapidly of a dying person. And I watched this happen in real time. We didn't quite understand what was happening in real time, but we left the room as this was happening, and then I think one of the nursing staff came up to us and wanted to go back in, and we said, hey, something has changed, so you might want to take a look at this. And then I don't know what happened after that. But whatever that episode was, about a week goes by, and she apparently made enough of a recovery from that to where the last time that I saw her, this was January 18th of this year. The last time I saw her, I think it was a Sunday, I went to go visit her in the hospital. My mother was also there with me. And January 18th happened to be her wedding anniversary. So we thought, hey, maybe this is a good idea to bring her wedding album with us. So we did that. And we went there, we went to go see her. We had the wedding album in the hopes that maybe it would reactivate some latent memories. And let me tell you, she recognized us, and she recognized the wedding album, and then she recognized every person in it. So she knew exactly who we were, what we had, and why we were showing this to her, because we also told her, hey, it's your anniversary. So we talked about the wedding album with her for a while. Her speech, unfortunately, was affected by whatever stroke she had had. So it was a little bit difficult to understand her. She was always very articulate, very precise in her word choice. But that capacity was diminished somewhat. But still, obviously, when you know a person, you know what they're talking about, whether or not you can understand every word. So, more or less, we were able to interact. So we talked about the wedding album. She relayed some memories of her wedding day to us. Tried to place them with the pictures as best as she could, and I feel like she did a good job. Obviously, I wasn't there on the day, but she understood what was happening. She asked me about work. She asked my mother about work, how we were doing, what was going on at home. And that is my last memory of my grandmother. She wasn't 100%. She wasn't quite the person that I remembered, but she recognized me. She knew who I was, and she knew that I knew who she was. January 26th in the morning, she died. I wasn't there that day. I could have been there, but I chose not to be there because I knew it was going to happen that day. And I knew that she was unconscious, and I knew that it wouldn't matter if I were there or not. And quite honestly, I wanted my last memory with my last grandparent to be on her wedding anniversary, looking at her wedding album. So that was the decision that I made that day, and I feel okay with that. Sometimes I think about, well, should I have gone that day? Should I have been in the room? Honestly, it wouldn't have mattered. But that's something for me to grapple with. But I feel secure in that choice. And in particular, I feel good about if you can have the luxury of choosing when you would like to say goodbye to someone. If you can do it when they know who you are and when they know who they are. You know things are bad. You know that there's nothing you can do about it, but at very least you can have that primordial, primitive human connection of I know you and you know me. If you can have that luxury, if you can make that choice, I'd greatly recommend making it. So she died and everything that she owned became ours. We're not bad off financially, but we're not rich. So her house and all of her stuff was something that we would have liked to keep, but we couldn't. None of us are independently wealthy enough to be able to maintain that. So immediately we started to go through the house and started to sell off what we could sell and then throw out the rest. We sold her car. We sold all of her furniture. We took what we wanted, which wasn't much. Photo albums, little odds and ends here and there, but that was more or less it. We sold the house on April 3rd of this year. I remember earlier that morning, I was lucky enough not to have to go to work first thing in the morning. If you don't know, I'm a social worker for my county government, county social services agency. Part of my job duties involve visiting my clients in their homes. So it happened to be one of the days when I do that. So I was able to take time in the morning and go to the house for the last time. So I did that. And I knew that it was going to be the last time in that house. And it was really unique to be walking through that house entirely empty. None of the furniture was left. None of her possessions were left. It was just an empty shell. And it no longer felt like, hey, this is my grandparents' house. It felt like, oh, this is a random house that we have, and we can't afford to keep it, so I hope it sells soon because we're keeping the lights on in a place we don't live. So it was so unique to be there, and of course to be involved with the clean out and all of that, but it was so unique to be there, knowing where I was, knowing what had happened there, knowing that basically every major event in my family for the last 50 years had happened there, but to recognize that it's gone. It's over. None of the people who were here at those times are here anymore. It doesn't mean anything anymore. It was poignant, it was difficult, but in the same way it was also somewhat liberating to recognize that these things, these places, they don't necessarily mean so much. It's what you remember, it's what you experience, and it's what you can take forward. That's what matters. The places don't mean anything, necessarily. There is significance, of course, but it's not the end-all, be-all. I haven't driven past the house since. I haven't been in the neighborhood since, even though it's only about a mile and a half away from where I'm sitting right now talking to you. Just like I wanted my last memory with my grandmother, my last memory with my last grandparent to be when she recognized me, when she recognized herself, when she was lucid enough to communicate, I think I want my last memory in that place to be when it was ours, when it was still more or less recognizable, although it was empty. I'm okay with that. But that's where I have been for the last few months, since January of this year. That's why I've not been making so much content lately. Obviously, part of the reason for that is my grandfather in particular was absolutely instrumental in getting me interested in cars, working on them, and then later driving them, of course. He was a fantastically gifted driver as well, I will say. He would power slide a Dodge Durango, of all things, in four-wheel drive, mind, anytime it rained or snowed. Why? Because he could, yes. But obviously, cars and doing things with my hands and all that stuff, it's inextricably linked to my grandparents, and they're not here anymore. So sim racing, it's just an offshoot of that. And it was even my grandparents, particularly my grandfather, who introduced me to what became sim racing in 1999 when he bought me a copy of Gran Turismo 2 for the PlayStation. So even this is inextricably linked to my grandparents. So it's been hard. It's been really hard. And it's something that I'm not entirely sure yet how to process or what to do with. So that's why I haven't been doing so much in terms of sim racing. That's why I haven't been doing so much in terms of YouTube for the most part. But I'm not going away. This isn't the end. That might come in the future. I don't know. It's on the table. But I haven't made any decisions regarding that as of yet. But regardless, this is where I am at the moment. This is where I've come from. And this is my overall state here on July 13th, 2025, having experienced what I've experienced and still trying to process all of it. It's not fun, it's not easy, but it's not terrible either. I'm okay. Totally okay. It's just a lot to grapple with. But for the moment, at least, I'm still here. On YouTube, anyway. And we'll see what we do in the future. But I just wanted to explain, in so many words, what's been going on and where we are, and perhaps maybe what you would like to see, what you think, and beyond that, maybe what happens in the future. Those of you who know me a little bit more intimately, thank you. You've been there. I've talked to you a lot about all of this and more. Thank you. And those of you who maybe are just hearing all of this for the first time, just know that I am okay. It's just different now. And I'm still learning how to deal with that. I'm still learning how to live in this new paradigm. But I'll figure it out. Until next time, though, F-Man saying thank you very much for listening. And of course, we will see you soon.